Let me ask, the movie Leave the World Behind, which was produced by the Obamas, paints a pretty distressing picture of how you could turn America against itself in 3 easy steps. Step 3 being civil war. How easy do you think it is in reality to destabilize the US or any other major country?
Destabilizing the United States would be very difficult because at the end of the day, the US we are a strong unifying culture. When we are attacked, it supersedes all other things. We saw that with 9/11. We saw it in the Vietnam War. We saw it time and time again, right? When we are attacked, it unifies us. It's not the same cultural response every country has. So if we were to see a large scale hack, if TVs were to suddenly go down, radios were to suddenly go down, if the whole network and infrastructure started to fall apart, if Teslas started self-driving themselves and blocking roads, the last thing we would do is start killing each other. If anything, we would all unify because at our core, we are a fighting culture. It's one of our biggest flaws and one of our biggest strengths. We are a warring culture here in the United States. Now, that said, the part of the movie that to me was so prescient was that instead of us having one enemy, we faced a unity force of enemies that were all collaborating and coordinating the attack together. So that's what the movie's premise was, right? What if it wasn't one bad guy? What if it was an amalgam of people who don't like you? Essentially, what if 10 bullies attacked you instead of one bully? I think that is getting to the heart of what conflict really looks like now and what conflict will look like for the United States for the next generation.
Tell me more about that. I've heard you talk about this. You've said something that unfortunately rings a little too true to me, which is that World War III has already begun. If that's true, it certainly doesn't feel like it. So what do you mean by that? What do you think World War III will or does look like?
So it's interesting that you say that because when I hear people say it doesn't feel like World War III has started, World War II, when it started, also didn't feel like World War II had started for America. If you recall, America didn't get involved in World War II until after all of Europe had basically been ingested by the Nazi Party. Only after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor did World War II start being felt by Americans. World War III is very similar. What we're seeing right now is a whole-scale attack on American resources, the US dollar, American influence, American dominance. And any war is really about bringing your opponent down in terms of influence and power. And at the same time, increasing your own influence and power. Where World War III looks different than World War II is that World War III is being fought through these proxy wars, third country battles, oftentimes poor or impoverished battles that are being bankrolled by large world leaders. If you look at Libya, if you look at Syria, if you look at Afghanistan, if you look at Yemen, all these fit the proxy war model. And those are just major conflicts. There are minor conflicts happening all over Asia, Latin America, and South America, or Latin America and Africa, that show even more active involvement by the United States, the Russians, the Chinese, North and South Koreans, Turks, Germans, waging conflict through third countries all over the planet. And what are they fighting for? What makes it worthwhile for the United States to engage in a conflict against the Houthis in Yemen? What makes it worth it for Iran to invest in the same conflict? The reason it's a good investment is because they are increasing their own influence and power without risking their own nationals or without risking their own military successes or failures. It's easier to fund a civil war from outside than it is to engage in what's known as interstate war, which is when your nation state invades another nation state, like we're seeing with Russia and Ukraine.
Okay, Civil War. It's the idea that really stood out to me in the movie Leave the World Behind. It's something I've thought a lot about. my audience has heard me talk ad nauseum about Ray Dalio's growing percentage prediction of civil war here in the US. It's interesting that you call us a warring culture, that we're very good at uniting, because we are also proving that we're very good at splitting almost exactly right down the middle, which I have a whole thesis about, which maybe we'll get into. But while I agree with you that I think the movie Leave the World Behind is just exceptionally unrealistic in terms of, it's like, oh, first isolation and just take out other communications. No big deal. That would be brutally difficult. And of course, if somebody could, they would have already. But it's one of those where, from a movie perspective, the suspension of disbelief to point out a human truth, I think, is really prescient.
Yes.
I don't think it is accidental that the Obamas are behind this. Somebody that's been in the war room, somebody that really understands what the darker side of human nature can look like when nudged in the right direction. And it's very theatrical. I do not want anybody to think I'm saying, hey, that's a documentary on how this will go. Very much not. But once you grant them that, then you can look at, okay, when a country is divided, when people turn on themselves, it's the ultimate destabilizing factor. And when I look at, less so honestly with Russia and Ukraine, which may be my ignorance, but I don't think so, very much so with Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Palestine, depending on how you want to think about it, that one to me feels like they have an anchoring ideology which makes it effectively impossible for them to get along. And by leveraging that, you get some really dire consequences. And so we're seeing that play out in real life. And that to me is what they're playing with in the movie Leave the World Behind, is, okay, just grant me that they are divided. And now what does it look like once people begin turning on each other, tapping into the tribalism, tapping into this sense of wanting to protect you and yours. And that is an algorithm running in the human animal. And so when you, for people that haven't seen you before, which would be shocking at this point, but with your background as a CIA agent, how do you tap into that? Like, when I think about the velocity of information created by social media, my original intro for this episode that I wrote was that the internet really changed everything because it allows human psychology to play out in a different way. And the way that the internet allows human psychology to play out is it is so easy to confuse people. It is so easy to confuse people. And if I'm looking at, forget the movie, if I'm looking at what's really happening, I'm not even saying it's coordinated. I'm just saying that the velocity of information that comes across your social feed, where you have the algorithm from an AI perspective colliding with the AI that runs the human, any individual human, yours is going to be different than the next person, but there's enough similarity that we can really get some flywheels going. But the velocity of information makes it very easy to confuse people, because people are extraordinarily bad at understanding a position from a nuanced place. And so if you were going to analyze the situation that we're in now, where you've got someone like Ray Dalio, who has a lot of credibility, in my opinion, saying, okay, likelihood of civil war is going up. You've got your own take that World War III is potentially already happening, that this is a proxy battle. We've got things popping off in the Middle East. We've got things popping off in Russia. How do we pour fuel on a fire that's already burning by confusing people with fast information?
So what's really interesting is you're exactly right that people get confused easily, and you're exactly right that velocity of information is a factor in that confusion. Where I would challenge, and I don't think you were saying this outright, but I want to make sure that nobody misunderstands, that velocity of information and confusion existed long before the internet, long before social media.
You don't, I will potentially take exception to that. And I will say that the velocity of information that you could get before would come from a narrow band of sources.
Correct.
And now the velocity of information not only is 100 times, 1,000 times faster, it is coming from 1,000 times more sources. And so it does feel unique, this moment.
I don't disagree with you. Yeah. I agree with you in terms of volume. It's velocity that I'm focusing on, right? Volume, absolutely. We have more information now and more channels and more avenues than ever before. But think about our parents. Our parents used to wait every day for the morning newspaper and for the 5 o'clock news. I remember my dad rushing home for the 5 o'clock news. Why? Because those two touch points were essentially the only time they had in an entire day to find out what was going on anywhere else. So when that 60-page newspaper landed on the doorstep on Sunday morning, that was everything. That was the holy grail for news for the week. So if you think about it in terms of velocity, as fast as you could read through those 60 pages, you got all your new information. Everything challenged what you previously knew, and everything set the stage for what you were going to assume until the next Sunday paper or until the next Monday local paper. Same thing with the 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock news. You waited for that moment, and whatever update came in that 30-minute or 1 hour cycle became your foundation of truth for the next 24 hours. We live in a world now where the volume and the velocity combine. So now what you learn this second literally changes when your feed refreshes half a second later, right? So the volume is so different, and the velocity and the volume combined exacerbate the what I think you correctly call the confusion of information. This is another element when you ask me how I see this as a CIA officer. One of the core things that people don't understand is that in a covert influence campaign, I mean, that's for a CIA officer, covert influence is a tactical rule book. It's a recipe. Here's how you make it. You crack 2 eggs, you take 2 cups of sugar, and you melt some butter. That's how you make a cake. Covert influence campaign has 3 parts. One of those parts is simply creating information that contradicts other information that exists, not by creating something new, but by exacerbating something that's already believed. So you just take 2 existing narratives and you pour fuel on one of those narratives just to make it burn. And then as conflict erupts between these 2 narratives, then you pour fuel on the other narrative just to keep the fire going. And that's how you start a covert influence campaign. The goal of covert influence is not to get people to believe in something. It's to get them to get confused by everything so that you can create general chaos, because chaos degrades the ability for unification. That's the real goal behind covert influence.
How real is the threat of covert influence?
It's not even a threat. It's a guarantee. It's happening all the time. It's happening everywhere around us all the time. So organized, disorganized, intentional, unintentional, state-run, transnational, government-sponsored, U.S.-sponsored. Covert influence is happening everywhere all the time.
If you like that clip, check out another powerful clip right here, and I'll see you there.